My son keeps counting down. When he reaches 0, something horrifying takes place. My little Noah has been bullied since 5 years old. He was always small for his age, speckled and freckled with a shock of copper hair. He had prey eyes, no jawline, negative canthal tilt. He was an easy target, but after the tragedy that happened, Noah has never been the same. I still feel my spine tingling from what had happened to my son. He came home from school one day and told me he made a friend, Martin. I was happy for him. I assumed it was some other kid whose peers deemed him weird and that they could take comfort in their exile with each other. He'd go to Martin's after school and come back smiling and happy. I was so relieved. Then one day Noah didn't come home. I waited half an hour in the hopes that he was just late and that he'd lost track of the time. When he didn't show, I started to get worried. I began wandering the streets looking for him. I knocked half the doors in the neighborhood before I finally called the police. They were worried too. He was missing for a total of 2 days. I can't tell you the terror I lived through. I didn't sleep. I didn't eat. I wandered the streets shouting his name. All the bullies from his class suddenly found their conscience and helped by posting flyers about the town. Their parents came round with plates of food and offers of help. It takes a tragedy to make people see you, to make them help. Martin never came. You see, when the police went to school to find out Martin's address, they found that there was no Martin in Noah's class. There were only 2 Martins in my small town, in fact. One was a local sex offender and the other an elderly man up Pinewood Avenue who was bedbound. It goes without saying that I feared the worst. Then they found him. I got a speeding ticket, trying to the hospital as quickly as I could. My head was buzzing. What had happened to him? Was he all right? My little Noah. When I arrived, a policeman ambushed me. He took me into a relative's room. His face was grave and I could have wept standing there, waiting. "We found him in Magnolia," he said. "He's completely uninjured. There's no sign of any assault, but why does there always have to be a but? Why couldn't he have been fine? Why couldn't he have wanted to come home and watch Star Trek with me?" My relief died like fire in the rain. He's not responding well. We found him in an abandoned house. He was sitting alone in a room. He had been fed and watered. From all evidence at the scene, there appears to have been no restraints nor any kidnap. We're still investigating, but Noah isn't exactly forthcoming with any information. The doctors are hopeful that your presence might change that. He was in a bed, cross-legged and staring at the ceiling. He didn't even look at me as I entered. Something was wrong. 100,003, he said in his feeble little voice. Sunlight crept in through the blinds and blanketed him in strange bars. 100,002. "Noah, it's Dad," I called out to him. My words didn't seem to reach him. He was in his own world, just counting. 100,001. 100,000, he said. 99,999. Why isn't he speaking? Why is he counting? I asked. "Does your son have autism or any mental conditions? Is there a history of schizophrenia in your family or his mother's side?" he asked, providing me with no information. No autism, no schizophrenia. He's got nothing like that. He only plays League of Legends, which explains why sometimes he may seem autistic. But why is he like this? What's going on? Please, Doc. I glanced at him again, still counting away. I looked at my son, Noah. He is eating and drinking. He has no injuries nor any fever. My initial guess was early presenting schizophrenia, yet without any family history and his lack of reaction to medication, I find it unlikely. Dr. Auld said, "I cannot dismiss the possibility of some sort of trauma that has caused Noah's change in behavior. That sicko had hurt him in some way. He might not have laid a hand on him, but he'd put something in Noah's head. I became sure of it then. Martin, his friend, hadn't been some kid from class, but the neighborhood creep who had taken advantage of his loneliness. A few of the dads from Noah's class told me where the creep lived. This was my burden to bear. A real Sigma takes care of matters on his own. I had been such an awful father. I didn't knock. I plunged his door open. The disgusting lout was sprawled out on his couch with a roll-up between his thin, dreed-up lips. Before he could react, my fist went burrowing down into his face. The sounds of him grimacing filled me with pleasure, like coming. He looked confused and tried to scramble away. Who are you?" the slimebag said. "Noah's father. What did you do to him?" I punched again and heard his nose breaking. "The 10-year-old boy you've been grooming." "I ain't been grooming any 10-year-olds. Jesus fuck," he exclaimed, his forearms across his face, defensively. I stopped punching. "That missing kid? I told the cops already. I ain't got nothing to do with that. I'm on the register, sure. Nothing to do with any kids. I'm not a pedo. Christ. It was a misunderstanding with a boyfriend that got me put on. No kids. I swear. I don't have anything to do with your kid. Believe me, please." His coffee table was stacked high with adult male magazines. I believed him. I called the police on myself in the end. I sprinted back to the hospital. Nothing had changed. He was still counting down. Every hour the numbers grew smaller. He'd stop to sleep, but when he'd wake, he'd continue the count. 40,603, he said. His voice was changing. The doc said it had to do with the fact he never shut up anymore. His vocal cords were strained and raw. He sounded almost like an old man. My poor little Noah. I couldn't help but wonder what would happen when he got down to 0. Would he stop counting? What would happen when he was finished? I think the doctors were wondering that too. They were stumped. Never seen a case like Noah before. They kept saying, "Dad, what's happening to me?" he said. I thought I had him back. The moment died as quickly as it came. The lights switched back off and I was in the dark abyss again, searching the cold, nothing for a thread of the sun I loved so much. 39,963. It isn't fair. Life. Something wasn't right. I knew that. The son I loved felt further away with every strained number. He was drifting off into the ether and all my love would go with him. 20, 19, he said at short intervals. 18, 17, 4, 3, 2, 1. He started convulsing. His eyes rolled to the back of his head, just little pools of white. His little body, every inch of which I adored and loved, thrashed around as if electricity was coursing through it. The nurses and doctors pushed me out of the way. All I could do was watch as my world crumbled into nothing. Then he stopped. There was a moment of calm. He slowly pushed his his way out of the nurse's grip and he sat up. I felt hope reach a crescendo within me. He's back, I thought. He's home. Then I looked at him and it slipped away again, into a void of spreading dread. His eyes weren't his anymore. They were the same blue, but they belonged to a stranger. Where am I? He asked in that strange, crackled voice. A parent knows. I can't explain it. You just know. The Noah sat on that hospital bed wasn't my Noah. He was someone else's. He looked at me as if he didn't know me. All the moisture had been drained out of me. I felt like nothing, like I would dissolve into tatters. You're in hospital, Noah, Dr. Ald said. Good, he said. He grunted and his body moved oddly. He surveyed his hands and legs as if he were just discovered them and moved as if he expected them to ache. I feel good. That's excellent, a nurse said with a warm smile. Do you want some of your toys? Your dad brought you in your favorite stuffed bear. He looked at Mr. Snuffles as if he had never seen him before. My hairs were standing up. They refused to lie flat. Interesting bear, he said, judging its missing eye. He spoke as if he was older, more seasoned. This wasn't Noah. This wasn't Noah. He did not cradle it to his chest. It looked at me, that thing in my son's body, and a small smile touched its lips, creeping up at the corners, unnaturally. I shook my head. This couldn't be. His vitals are stable, Dr. Ald told me. This is good. He isn't talking like Noah, I said to him. He mused with his clipboard. He isn't acting like Noah. Somewhere else in the hospital, another tragedy was underway. I was wandering the halls numbly, with a cup of hot coffee in my hands. The doors to ambulatory slammed open. A trolley was rushed through, a crowd of frantic family members chasing after it. An old man lay in a bed, reaching out for the sky's embrace. He was panicked. His eyes were wide like Noah's had been when he called out for me. I want my dad! I want my dad! The old man shouted at the top of his lungs. Then he saw me, and his hand pulled out for me. His words seemed to have been stolen from him. He was trying to throw himself out of the trolley just to reach me. Dad, I want my dad! He shouted, and the words filled my belly with dull, throbbing unease. Does your father have dementia? Dad, it's me. No, Dad, I want my dad, he cried, reaching out for me again. My body wanted to chase after him, to reach him. The coffee cup slipped from my hand and fell like a clatter to the ground. A pool of dark brown soaked my feet. Do you have a name so we can pull his records? The doctor asked as he followed the trolley into a room. The old man slipped out of view. Martin, the woman, still breathless, replied. His name's Martin Smith. A strange coincidence. Had to be. Little lines tied together, stitching into some awful patchwork quilt. It didn't make any sense. It couldn't be. I returned to Noah. I felt like a zombie, like my head wasn't connected anymore. It was floating in the clouds. Nothing made sense. I can't wait to come home with you, Dad, Noah said, and my eyebrows furrowed. I shut my eyes and thought of my boy, at the gates of the school, in the arms of his mother, his face turned wrinkled and old. We're going to have so much fun. I just know it. He's not my kid. This thing I'm taking home, it's not my kid.